Barku. Hey there, friends and family. Welcome back to the Barku podcast, where it's all about exploring the ancient ideas of the wisdom traditions around us to spark a little bit of inspiration in our hearts as we journey together through life. Today, I want to share a little bit of a story about where I grew up. I grew up on Saladin Avenue in Glen Waverley, at least for the later years of my time at home with my parents and my sister. And a couple of doors down from where we lived on Saladin Avenue there in Glen Waverley, there was a particularly interesting building project. And it caught the attention of all the neighbours. Not because of glaring breaches in the building code, but because rather than using the standard brick facade that was commonplace to the brick boxes all around it up and down the street, the owners chose to take a very different approach, and they created this beautiful cottage using natural stone construction. Now, this building was a drastic contrast to the surrounding suburban brick boxes, the rendered rectangles that most people in that suburb lived in. There was an aesthetic beauty in the irregularity of the stone wall that everybody found really attractive. And I think we all understood that the beauty comes not just from what the structure is, but from an understanding of the process required to build it. Because each day we could walk past this house and see the piles of stone, seemingly chaotic and random, being formed into this beautiful cottage. Now, a standard brick wall that we're all familiar with hardly deserves a second glance when we walk by, because the uniform lines, the even courses, barely deviate. And if you do find yourself stopping to stare at a brick wall, more than likely it's because of unplanned irregularities or a lack of skill in the construction, which I can understand. Bricklaying is a really difficult skill to master, and a well-made brick wall shouldn't grab your attention because it's created perfectly and with a high degree of attention to detail. We want our brick walls to look uniform, with each and every brick conforming to a set pattern. But by contrast, the organic beauty of a natural stone wall, it captivates our attention and imagination in a whole new way, and we can't help but stop and marvel, just like the neighbours on Saladin Avenue all those years ago. Because we understand intuitively that there's a different skill required to build a natural stone wall. The builder must see the potential of each organic stone, every one of them a completely different size and shape. And they need to understand how each of those individual stones can work in harmony with the stones around it. They take a pile of rocks and they piece them together to create a solid wall without gaps, with stability and structural integrity. It needs to find balance. And this requires an attention to detail. It requires foresight and creativity, not just a once-off or a systematic learning of a pattern or a skill. It takes considerable creativity, and it's certainly a slower process. I mean, the reason we don't see a lot of natural stone buildings around us is because it's slow. It's contemplative. Rather than simply following a linear system, it takes a level of contemplation that we don't normally want to pay for when it comes to building a home. Because our homes have become all about quick, easy, consistent products that we can purchase the most number of bedrooms for the least number of dollars. But what if we had a different view of the way we build in our society? I remember reading in the New Testament history class that I was a part of during theological college that the popular Western version of Jesus as a carpenter's son, where Joseph was a carpenter, so presumably Jesus would have picked up some of those skills, hammering and nailing and sawing away in, his dad's workshop there, they may be quite inaccurate, because historians noted that the most common buildings in northern Israel during the life and times of Jesus Christ were predominantly constructed from stone. And the ancient Greek word tekton, which is used in the New Testament to describe Joseph's profession, it actually doesn't translate literally to carpenter. It translates more accurately to English as artisan or craftsman, which is equally applicable to a stonemason as it would be to a carpenter. And considering the number of stone buildings in ancient Israel at that time, more than likely, Joseph and Jesus were stonemasons. And for the sake of a good metaphor, which you should know by now I really enjoy, I love to think of the allegorical Jesus as the Spirit personified in the stories of the gospel, not as a carpenter, but as a stonemason. The allegorical character of Jesus, the Spirit of all things personified, pieces things together like a stonemason, carefully considering the shape, the size, the weight, the irregularities of each stone as he places them into a wall. And you can imagine this. If you've ever been down at the beach and you've seen a little pile of rocks, and we used to take kids down with Operation New Start, and we'd find a few rocks, and the kids enjoyed just placing those stones one on top of the other to try and build a little tower. And you understand really quickly that it takes all of your focus and attention to do it well. It's playful, it's fun, and you're not demanding anything of any of the stones that isn't already part of what they are. Now, the metaphor of building with stone finds its way into the Judeo-Christian literature in the scriptures as a recurring metaphor. First of all, we find it in the Psalms. Again, I talked about this in the last podcast, but the Psalms literally means the book of instrumental music. It's poems, it's verses, it's song. And Psalm 118, 22 to 23 says, "The stone the builders refused has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvellous in our eyes." See, the stone that the builder refused has become the cornerstone. I mean, who's ever felt like either a part of them or perhaps the whole of them has been rejected by the builders in our society today? I know I can certainly hold my hand up and say I've felt that way in family. I've felt that way in workplaces, in the structures of the institutionalized churches that I've been a part of. But the scriptures here from the Old Testament and the Psalms say the stone that the builder refuses has become the cornerstone, and the Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Now, interesting word there, Lord, which I wanted to comment on, because in the Old Testament there are many different words used to describe the ineffable name of God, and Lord is just one translation of Yahweh, which is the breath, the breathed word of God that I love to talk about, because it carries so much more depth and mystery than simply saying God, which kind of says we could know too much about the mysteries of the universe, when really we're only really pointing to limited parts of our experience. But in the gospel story, when Jesus' authority is questioned as he's teaching in the temple courts, and his teachings are not in line with what the chief priests and the elders of the temple really like to hear. See, Jesus was always questioning the authority of the temple structure of the day, which represented the Roman government on a local level. And Jesus' teachings got to the point where it really started to piss off the chief priests and the elders of the temple court, and they confronted Jesus. And we're told that in one point in the gospel story, and this is really a tipping point for the relationship between Jesus and the organized temple and church of the day. The priests begin to question Jesus' authority, and Jesus' response, of course, not in simple easy to understand terms, Jesus turns to the ancient metaphor of the stone. And he says, the stone the builders refused has become the cornerstone. God has done this, and it is marvellous in our eyes. Therefore I tell you that the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to people who will produce its fruit. He who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, but on he whom it falls, they'll be crushed. The outlook for the temple priests isn't good, and they knew that Jesus was talking about them. Broken into pieces by this stone or crushed seems like an unfortunate demise either way. And it's at this point that the temple priests and the elders begin plotting to arrest Jesus, because they want to take him out of the picture. See, the kingdom dynamics that Jesus was teaching, the ideals of love, equality, compassion, caring for the sick, restoring the dignity of the oppressed and the downtrodden, all threatened the power structures which supported the opulent lifestyle enjoyed by the temple authority, who were the ruling elite of the day. Now, the economic success of the temple depended on the continued oppression and the systems that they had developed to ensure that the population was fearful of them and kept conforming, that they paid their dues, their temple taxes, and they continued to follow the economic model that privileged a few at the expense of the many. But the message of Jesus threatened that structure. See, this statement was the turning point in the gospel story, and it inevitably led to Jesus being arrested and murdered on the cross. But how do we build our society today? I mean, we wouldn't create systems that privilege a few at the expense of others, would we? We wouldn't make sure that we keep people enslaved in labour-type jobs that they don't really want to be a part of, making sure that they conform to a system to just continue to benefit privileged few at the top. I mean, it seems ludicrous, doesn't it? But let's think about the way our society has evolved. See, in 1909, Frederick Taylor developed the theory of scientific management, which basically stripped individuals of autonomy in the workplace in favour of systematically training people to complete tasks on a production line to produce products more quickly and efficiently. So rather than teaching somebody how to produce a whole product from beginning to end, from design to construction, Taylor's idea was that people could simply be trained in parts of the system. So perhaps you'd be cutting or gluing or sanding or staining, but never seeing a product from beginning to end. And our society, since 1909, has continued to develop in this way. Our school system, I think, reflects this. We teach our kids from a really early age to dress the same as everybody else, to respond to the same time frames as everybody else, to eat at the same times as everybody else, go to the toilet, play at the same times as everybody else. We try to get kids to conform their handwriting to exactly the same font. And to me, it feels like the way we've structured our society is just chipping away at what makes us truly individual and unique. I read a quote this week from a fellow called Jiddu Krishnamurti, who was a theosopher, cross between a theologian and a philosopher. I like that. And he says, it is no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. So if you've ever felt like you've been cast aside by the builders in your society, looked over, perhaps not accepted, perhaps there's an internal battle going on when you feel like you're questioning your authority to be who you truly are, or you're questioning the validity of something within you that demands expression. It's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. See, those internal battles and those external battles are simply a reflection of our capacity to incorporate each other into this stone wall of life in ways that honor and respect each and every part of the individual. So what's the solution here? How do we move from a linear bricklaying system that attempts to chip away at the individual to make them conform, that leads us to heading out on the weekend to get hammered, because hammering again is another way to help us fit that mold, to a society that honors and cares for and respects the individual expression that each and every one of us can bring to this world. Because organic stone walls, while they may cost a little more to build, while they may take a little more effort and compassion to build, they're a whole lot more aesthetically beautiful than simply volume builders, cheap knock-up brick walls. So all the best this week. I'm sure this metaphor will land with you in one way or another, whether you're in family dynamics, in education, in the workplace, in the community. And I pray that you find a way to rediscover a little bit of that cornerstone that makes you who you are within yourself and within your community, so that you can build upon it. And yeah, it'll probably challenge some of the authority structures in your society and in your life. But thousands of years of wisdom tells us that that's how we move forward. That's how we build a society that honors and respects every individual as part of a cohesive and solid whole that has integrity and balance and a place for everybody, no matter how big or small. So Barku, all the best this week, and I will speak to you soon.